बाकी बाकी सब ठीक है, पास्ता चैटर्जी। और
सुरजीत दास, यही है ना सुरजीत दास?
हाँ,
फिर राजेश रंजन। शील अपने पास रख, यहाँ मत रख के भूल जाएगा।
पेन पेन देता मैं देखना।
Good afternoon to everyone present here. I, Neha Gupta, on behalf of Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, would like to extend a warm welcome to all the panelists, faculty members, industry experts, senior academicians, alumni, and students from premium institutions. So good afternoon again. So continuing from where I left out. So welcome to all the panelists, faculty members, industry experts, senior academicians, alumni, and students from other premium institutions across India and the world who have joined us today for the panel discussion on Union Budget 22-23, theme the first budget of Amrit Kaal, Expectations and Reality. Every year, February starts with the announcement of Union Budget. Yet, this year's budget seems to be special. There are several reasons behind it. Firstly, highlighting the theme, it's the first budget of the Amrit Kaal, the next 25 years, where India seeks to ascend to new heights of prosperity and self-reliance. Secondly, it's the last full budget before the 2024 Lok Sabha election. Lastly, it's interesting to analyze how this year's budget can play its role in further strengthening India's roots in various sectors of the global economy. So today we have with us distinguished guests from academia, governance, and industry to decode the current dynamics between the budget's expectations and the concurrent realities underneath it. We are extremely honored to introduce to the audience our esteemed panelists for the day. First, we have with us Mr. Ravi Pokharna. Mr. Pokharna is currently working as the Executive Director of Pehel India Foundation, which is a think tank dedicated to the task of taking India to the top rung of country economic rankings to the world within this century. With his expertise in public policy and governance, he worked as the joint coordinator, standing committee of on civil society organization at Niti Aayog. Mr. Pokharna is an alumnus of Faculty of Management Studies, University of Delhi. Second panelist for the day is Professor Partha Chatterjee. Professor Chatterjee is currently professor and the founding head of the Department of Economics at the Shivnadar University. He was also the first dean for international partnerships at Shivnadar University. A PhD in economics from University of Minnesota, USA, Professor Chatterjee's research interests are broadly in macroeconomics, international economics, and issues related to emerging economies. We have a third panelist, Dr. Surajit Das. Dr. Das is currently Assistant Professor at Center for Economic Studies and Planning, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Having done his PhD and MPhil and Masters from JNU, his areas of interest include macroeconomics, econometrics, public economics, and macroeconomic policy. As an economist, he has worked at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. And last but not the least, we have Mr. Rajesh Ranjan. Mr. Ranjan is currently the Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy at Microsoft India. Moreover, as an industry expert, he has held several positions in major firms like KPMG and other leadership positions in Radial International, PD Consulting, Invest into India Private Limited, and many more. As an assistant audit officer at Comptroller and Auditor General of India, he took charge to look at after specialized sections like administration, bill and establishment, etc. Mr. Ranjan is also an alumnus of Delhi School of Economics. Moderating this chair, we have our very own Professor Biswajit Nath, Professor of Economics at the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, New Delhi, whose areas of interest include international economics, macroeconomics, trade analytics, econometrics, market research, and economic environment. Professor Nath has worked as an advisor for various international organizations like United Nations, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, Department for International Development, Commonwealth Secretariat, European Union, and Government of India. Now, I would like to call upon Srishti and Anjali, students of MA Economics, to greet the panelists by presenting them with bouquets. Looking forward to a fruitful discussion today. And on that note, I would like to invite our today's moderator, Professor Nag, to initiate the session.
Thanks. I think it's a pleasure really to have it after I think maybe after 3 years we are having this budget session analysis. This was a kind of a annual ritual in IIT campus. And I still remember several news agencies used to come to IIT to have discussions with the students. So of course it's not news agencies here, but we have great panelists here. I'd like to welcome all of panelists because we'd like to get a kind of a exciting discussion on the budget this year. As you know, that budget is an annual ritual for the government, but it also reflects the intent of the government, both short run and long run. Everybody knows that this year's budget is a pre-election budget, so short run objective is very clear. But there is also a long run objective because Honorable Finance Minister mentioned about Amrit at the beginning of the Amrit. And so that is something that they in mind for the long run. There is also been mentioned that the green budget, and also there are discussion about taking India to a different level in terms of financial inclusion, in terms of digitalization, and many. Finance Minister also mentioned about Saptarshi, so there are several strategies by which the government would like to take forward. So there are a lot of such things there by this time. I think students have read a lot. What is important here, the budget here raises hopes. At the same time, you will find people are also about suspicious whether the whether it will be really implemented. Because most of the time, what we see, that budget estimates, revised estimates, and the actual sometimes they are different. There are also concerns this time that high capital expenditure growth, whether it can be made by 5.9% fiscal deficit or across that. I heard from government to get the revenue, because the revenue concern is a major concern about the government. We also see a kind of a trade-off that in some of the social sectors, the expenditures are coming down, or maybe in real terms, it is coming down. In nominal terms, it is slightly good. So there are a lot of writings on the wall already. So I do not want to waste more time. Let us start this discussion. We can start with Ravi.
Hello. Okay. Hello everyone. Since I get to open the discussion, in being 2 days that the budget was passed, while thinking about what to speak here, I just trying to understand the perspective of the majority of us to look at budget. So I thought I'll start with that. If you remember a few years back, just after the budget was passed, news headlines used to be television, radio, etc. Chocolate has got dearer, and the prices of water bottles, plastic, etc. has got cheaper, and some trains have got additional stock mines, etc. These used to be the new highlights, which over the years, and if you look at from and background or policy background, we understand that this doesn't have much to do with budget. Why this being served to us as budget analysis or assessment? So this always seems so. This never seemed right. So over the years, and now we see that the entire, a lot of it, not entirely, but the lot of optics have gone. And over the years that we've been analyzing budget, I've been able to create a frame. I myself created a frame and try to see what direction, and is this the direction that every budget takes, and more or less it proves that direction. If you look at, and for me personally, it is not about the numbers, but it is more about trends. Every budget goes up. So I've generally seen that this government has 4 or 5 focus areas. One is always about ensuring public utilities of most basic essential to be that 10 crore population. To look at the number of years we've seen taking gas and then toilets, etc. This budget, it was slight more outlay on the Awas Yojana, which is housing, and slightly more budget outlay on the water, the Jal scheme. So, and this has been a trend for the last couple of years. As I said initially, it was toilets, and then I think cooking gas and electricity, Jala scheme, etc. And now these two, as we saw the budget. So that is for me that's always the first area. The second focus area on the major trust we've seen over the years is infrastructure. And infrastructure, physical infrastructure, you always say rail goes this year, and we all are aware that railway, the budget outlay has been tremendous. The last major outlay, it is 10 times the last major outlay, which was done 4 or 5 years back. It's tremendous. And obviously there has been an urban infrastructure fund which has been created. Digital infrastructure also, there is great focus. So that is, and the thirdly being, there have been, I'm sure you all have read, 100 critical infrastructure projects have been identified, and the decision has been taken that they will be taken on priority. So we've seen that over years, infrastructure has been a great thrust focus of the government, and this trend was visible this year. Third area seen is you see that every year the government will pick up one or two or couple of sectors and try to remove hurdles. And I'm not talking about what happens on ground, but I mean, budget, the sense the budget is, the government is trying to remove hurdles and make it more globally competitive, make that sector globally competitive. We all have seen that this year, pharma has got such a big trust. I think huge. Last year it was 100 crores, and this year it was 1,250 crores. All everybody in the pharma sector was so pumped about it. And we've seen during COVID also the entire issue of API manufacturing and how it can be a national security issue also. This year, government said that we will be subsidizing or will be supporting manufacturing R&D in pharma, thereby strengthening it and making it further competitive and removing the bottlenecks that we as a country, who as a pharma capital, pharma there is a major thrust. Then there was another thrust on the electric vehicle. There was again huge outlay, budget outlay, the EV. Then agriculture also, we are aware of a fund which was created of agriculture, on the agriculture fund which was created. So third is this sector specific. I must add this the sector specific focus. There has been for last 3-4 years there has been a specific focus on keeping it green. Green growth element has also come in. There has been a specific budget outlay on towards green growth also. There are studies that this is the amount of fund that we require over the next 10-15 years to make it achieve our zero emission objectives. And this was the third one. And the last focus, which I see in every budget, is picking up one or two specific communities, specific issues, specific problems, and trying to address them. This year, 2-3 things that I noticed was one was what they've done with shrimps. Be aware that India produces some 80-90% of the total shrimps, and they come out of 3 states only. And there were major cost escalation because of this ongoing war. And now government has drastically reduced the tariff, and it is now becoming competitive. Last, I think, 1 or 2 years only, the shrimp exports have risen 30-50%. And another, so this is small segment, and this was addressed. Another small segment is the residential schools of tribal students, eclavy schools. So again, big outlay was made. These are small specific things that I've been seeing over the years, and I think this was continued, and this trend continues. I think this was a introductory remark.
Thank you. I think you have nicely put forward the sector-specific trust, infrastructure trust, and identifying critical industries. So not just the numbers, but the intent is very clear that how actually the government wants to make the country much more entrepreneurial or business-driven, and also focusing on sectors. So I can now turn to the first.
First of all, so glad that we are in a room talking about all of this, and thank you for organizing this and inviting me. This is an occasion where we get to meet people. So budget is, something that is almost like a festival in India, right? It happens once a year, but also the other side of the budget is that expectation from budget is just way too much, right? About everything, managing from the long run to the short run, as we talked about, or different sectors, as we talked about traditional consumers, all of it, right? And really, we can go on talking about every bit of it at length. But today, what I do is I will focus a lot more on aspects of a little bit medium term to long term growth aspects, right? Because this is something that is very critical for India, and I'm in a room of people who are in their 20s and so on, right? And soon, in 30 years from now, when you guys are on the stage, you will not find that many young people around, because that's going to change. So we have about 30 years or so by which this demographic transition is going to happen. And then within that, we have to make a thrust towards becoming a more developed country, right? Whatever the definition of developed economy is. So that's something that we need to focus on. And this budget really does focus on that, right? that the finance ministry is quite clear in its intent throughout this budget that it's not only changing gears, because the last two budgets were mostly managing the COVID shock, right? And the aftermath of it and dealing with the impact of that. But this year, it has clearly moved away from that and has tried to create a base for the next 30 years or so of the growth. At least that's what I would think the intent is, right? And the central piece in that is, of course, the capital expenditure, right? The capital expenditure outlay is 10 lakh crore from just the center. Right? And that is about 3.3% of the GDP. And then there is additionally the grant in aid for the states, which is about 3.7 lakh crores. So total expenditure on capital outlay is more than 4% of GDP. Right? Now, there are two things that we will talk about. One is, of course, this aspect of capital expenditure, but then we'll come back a little bit to talk about this whole idea of federalism and how states versus center is also, kind of getting the revenues from, spending the revenues from, importance of different aspects for states versus center. So we'll talk a little bit about that, though it's not explicitly in the budget, but it's very much a discussion that's going on today and will be important going forward, right? In fact, if you have read today's Times of India editorial, it talks about creating 100 states for India, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. So that's my rough agenda, and a lot of time, so I'll jump right on to this. Given that all of you probably are students, and of course my colleagues here and there, some of my colleagues, so let me fall back into a little academic discussion about growth theory. So what do we know from growth theory? We know growth theory that sure, when a country is capital deficient or low on capital, then that country can achieve high growth by investing in capital. And we have seen that happening. We have seen that in East Asia to a certain extent, happening post-World War II reconstruction. We saw that it happen, right? So it's not unreasonable to expect that India, which is still quite a bit of capital deficient, will actually benefit from this thrust in spending in capital, making investment by the government. And this you have to put in conjunction with the fact that for some reason, and I'll not get into that today, private investment is not taking off, right? In India, private investment has not taken off. There's been some bit of green shoots that's happening, but really that has not really happened. And that's where this question comes in a lot, that, okay, will this investment really result in a very high growth? And in that, again, probably all of you have gone through a little bit of macro. You understand we need to think a little bit about the multiplier effect of this capital investment. Right? The multiplier effect is that if the government is spending 100 rupees, will the output increase by more than 100? And there, as I said, I mean, given that India is an emerging economy, low on capital, the expectation is that it will. But it's hardly clear that it will. Why? Because one, we don't actually have a good study or a data on this, that what is the what is the multiplier effect in India, right? And some of the risks that are associated, I think a lot written about, talked about it. Capacity to, first of all, is the capacity to absorb. As you mentioned, for example, there's a 10-time in the last 5 years, 10-time increase in railways. Is railways in a position to actually absorb that much of money and make productive use of that, right? Similarly, highways and so on and so forth, that's all about 1.27 lakh crores, something like that, within highways itself. So for example, to create a highway, we need land. Even land acquisition takes so much time, right? So one is the absorption capacity. Second is, do we have enough, because the budget is for 1 year, is it even possible to do all of that within 1 year, given all of these are very long-term projects, right? So what we know from the other countries and academic literature in other that this multiplier is not something that is constant, not something that is given always, right? It depends. And it depends on a lot of things. It depends on what cycle the economy is in, whether the economy is in a depression or a recession or is booming and so on and so forth. Typically, it tends to be that the multiplier effect is when the economy is shrinking or at least not doing so well. In contrast, India is not there, right? India is among the fastest growing countries. It potentially can do better, but it's still growing at 5% or 6%. And at that growth rate, whether this will have a very significant multiplier effect is something in question. Also, the multiplier is much larger than, and this is actually something that is very important in deciding the multiplier, is when the interest rate is actually close to zero, right? And again, this is not the case. Right now, we are in a cycle where the inflation is going up, the interest rates are going up, and therefore, the whole idea that this can actually crowd in private investment is a little bit of question because the interest rates are actually already high. I have to say the government has done a commendable job in keeping fiscal deficit in check, right? But even in spite of that, it's not very clear that how much boost it will give to eventually to private investment. The second part of the growth theory is completely missing, which is a more sustainable growth can not happen only through capital expenditure, right? What we also need is essentially investment in people, investment in human capital, which will also lead to innovation and sustained growth rate, right? So if you think about any production function, you will understand that capital is just going to push you along the trend, it will not shift the trend itself. Whereas an investment in new capital, an investment which ensures there's a lot more innovation, and that will push the trend itself, right? So we don't see that much. The only thing that the government actually is trying to address here is a very short-run thing, which is about the skill deficit, and this is also very significant given that India is trying to attract a lot of manufacturing jobs, which in these days and time is actually much more skill intensive than what it was earlier before. And India is facing that problem where you see, for example, the factories in China are huge, large scale employment can happen. But when the same companies are coming to India, they are facing problems. Well, land, etc. The state governments are doing, excellent job in trying to address that. But where do they get the people, right? And that's something that we are not addressing. And skill sector can only do so much because they can only take people who have the basic understanding or basic level of education and then them to something more. But what we haven't been investing a lot more is in ensuring that we actually reap the benefit of this demographic dividend. So not on education, not on health, and I'm sure this will come back a little later. Okay, so I'll stop onto the health on this part a little bit. And just the person started looking at me, and I'm probably running out of time. But the other aspect that we need to think about is what's happening to the whole idea of the federal structure in India. And this goes back to actually the GST structure, right? In fact, on the day GST was introduced, 1st July 2017, I actually wrote an editorial for Economic Times in which I talked a little bit about these issues, that what's happening is the states are losing ability to generate their own revenue. The state budgets are in very bad shape, but they have very little ability to actually generate their own revenues other than from alcohol or petroleum products. Right? And that's why we see a lot, I'm not even getting to the politics of it, of the freebies or the liquor shops and so on and so forth. It's a lot to do with that. And in this budget, there is a provision of loan granting aid. Actually, it's not loan in some sense because it's a 50-year interest-free thing. But in some sense, the state governments become dependent on the center because the center now, because it's actually quoted as a loan or given out as a loan, can go back to the states and do a lot with how they are actually managing this, right? And also, other part that has happened is this, all these central schemes, and you have mentioned, including Narega and so on and so forth, their budget have been matched. And these were the budgets which were actually transferred to states, right? So now we will see a lot more of an issue with the state finances and state budgeting. While we are happy with this 5.9% fiscal deficit rate, which is lower than 6.4%, which was earlier. But the aggregate financing of government is in the shaky ground overall. And this budget again does not address anything about that bit, because now state governments do not have the ability to change. GST is fixed at a central level. So, if, for example, a major disaster happens in a certain country, a certain part of the country, then the state government does not have the ability to do much, except for again wait for central funds. Right. So this is something that really needs thinking, and I think we have to kind of address this. Otherwise, we will face a lot more problems going forward. So for now, I will stop here, and then maybe we can discuss a little more. Give the questions. Thank you.
Great. So from managing COVID to a long-term growth plan, and really important is we have raised to have a discussion, and one is about the absorption capacity. You promise to invest for capital, but whether the physical capacity to absorb that, we will have question about land related or creative and complications. Finally, where the investment not so easy. And second thing you mentioned about skill development, because when you're thinking of large investment, then you also need to have a lot of skill. I remember being a student having learning all of that. And in 1952, when second crisis plan, when actually India decided to have big investment, it had all the steel plants and heavy industrial. You remember in early 1960, all IITs, IIMs, and IIT were set up. The main reason is to reduce the skill gap, because so many big plants have been captured and engineers, managers. So you require that. So you also need to have this skill gap, not just the high skill level. I have the same skill level. So you come back to that. The last thing which is quite interesting is basically the trust and relations. States are so important in the training. States are able to be. So we'll come back to this thing. So when we talk because now we will come to private sector perception about the budget, especially when we see the large investment in promised investment in capital. So there'll be a lot of investment in digital infrastructure also. And when you have the digital infrastructure, you also require a lot of services around that. And when you think of 25 years from now, how actually we like to see India in 2047, we like to have a fully digitalized economy, maybe digital currency, maybe, a lot of things will be done, not just finance, but digitalized. How actually you see this budget actually provide maybe a momentum towards that way?
Thank you. And since a lot has been covered in terms of all these final aspects, everything, the capex and other things, maybe as you rightly said, I would like to limit it to one. What is the kind of perception that private sector has, and specifically because I work in the digital So I would delve a little deeper there. So of course, it was, as you know, welcomed by everyone because of one fact that there was some simplicity, in this budget. The theme is simplicity, and the government, while I come from the policy sector, there as well, while regulating, creating framework, they have been trying to keep things simple. So that, of course, further detailing as and when required is also done. The thing about Saptarshi, everybody knows that's a very good thing because that sets a framework in terms of these 7 areas where the focus would be, and very pertinent, in fact, the kind of areas that have been identified, the 7 points which are there, everybody knows that. What they're trying to do basically is that, they are trying to achieve growth through achieve growth through capacity building, capacity creation. So capacity in all aspects of life, basically, be it infrastructure, hard, soft, skilling, as everybody is discussing that problem. Of course, they're trying to address that as well. And that is not only through investment, the efficient capex investment, that is the key that they're trying to achieve, basically. And that also through reducing compliance. A lot of things you have seen over the years, how compliance is changing, taking a simpler shape again. And then also a tax regime, which is more, beneficial to the private sector. So there are a lot of tax concessions, a lot of, subsidies, and some new manufacturing schemes are also available. So that kind of support is increasing day by day. So, and this all is happening while it is being kept in the mind that the green future is imperative, and that has to be tech driven. So now I come to the digital part, basically. So as you saw, everybody has seen the data governance policy framework. It was announced that it will come into picture. What does it do? You all know government has a lot of data available with it. And they are saying this data lies unutilized without any productive use. So we'll ensure through this data governance policy how data sharing will happen, how the analytics, etc., could be done. And everybody knows the data privacy bill is also in the offing. The draft is already out. And again, I need to revisit that point of simplicity. The earlier data bill was withdrawn because of the complexities it was presenting to the country. So that is, the new bill is very simple, and everybody agrees to that. So that is one. The second is also, everybody is mentioning the platform creation. So DPI, basically, digital public infrastructure. And that is India's goal there is not only to create the DPIs for itself, but also go out and enable the whole world in terms of what India has achieved. So that will also be factored in while this whole discussion goes out. So all of things that you hear, the e-codes, the new DigiLocker that will come up for the SMEs, and it will simplify a lot of things in terms of sharing information, document compliance, etc. And then there was this announcement of 5G labs. So what has happened? We are in a very interesting situation right now. The things government wants to do, the base work has been set up. So the 5G is now available, so that they can come up and announce those 100 labs in terms of what could be innovated over the infrastructure that is available. To add to it, they further announced 3, AI Center of Excellences, because what they are seeing right now, of course, ChatGPT coming in and warming up the whole environment, that is another aspect. But what they realize that AI is the future, but what India is doing and where India is in those emerging tech and related technologies is very, very critical for the kind of targets they have for 2047. So these Center of Excellences, what they are trying to do, they are saying create AI in India for India, basically. So it is kind of carrying forward the Make in India theme, where they're saying make in India, make for India, and make for the world, right? So there's a similar theme running for this all Center of Excellence that's coming into picture. Then again, for manufacturing, particularly in electronics and related things, you have seen how the outlays have changed. Just to give you an idea, for Ministry of Electronics and IT, the budget has been increased by about 40%. But if you look at the Digital India program itself, the allocation has gone down from about 7,600 crores to about 4,800 crores, right? Because they've realized that soft and soft related issues maybe need a little less of the capex compared to the manufacturing that they're focusing on. So this reallocation would go into the manufacturing sector for electronics and related hardware, because the allocation there has increased quite a lot. For the MCIPs that was running earlier, the new PLI schemes which was announced earlier, a lot of allocation has increased. So that is one. Further, in terms of the Department of Technology, Department of Telecommunication, there as well the budgets have been increased by about 20%. Because as government sees things now, technology, especially digital technology, is all pervasive. Anything that they are going to announce and the approach that they have taken is to create digital platforms for everything. Everything means they already have a platform, for health. NDHM is a big platform. This year, you might have heard that they have announced something for agriculture as well. So bit by bit, they are creating those frameworks, ensuring that for a particular sector, what needs to be done if the digital capacity is to be created within that sector, and how it can be platform, a given shape of a platform. As you saying, the digital payment already, there is a platform identity, there is already. So that is being carried forward. R&D is a big focus in terms of what they need to do. And when I say R&D and also the capacity building and skill creation, the new challenge that government has seen is cybersecurity. So cybersecurity allocation has kind of gone about 4 times up. There's a 400 crore rupees allocation for cybersecurity in this year's budget, and that is mainly for capacity and awareness creation. That is not related to procurement. It is mainly about, because as skills are missing in every sector, cybersecurity has a very acute problem when it comes to skilled manpower being available to really address those challenges. And as everybody also knows, they are saying this is going to be India's decade. Any technology leader that is visiting India has acknowledged that the kind of digital infrastructure India has created is only going to not help India, but the entire world, if they're able to really export the way they want to export it. And within that, in the G20 also, the Digital Economy Working Group is a big group, which is again focusing in terms of how to really take the digital economy forward. And digital public goods is a key discussion there. Digital public goods is platforms like, Aadhaar or UPI, and which could be made available to the other countries. Just to, maybe conclude, what I have seen that every department or ministry, anything that has been announced, there is a hint of technology that would be used, right? As I mentioned, for finance also, there's this unified filing that has been proposed that will again come through technology. For the ease of doing business, this single window that is being proposed, again a technology platform that will be created. For this data processing center, I think basically that Minister of Corporate Affairs, again a technology platform. Health, as you already see, but the outlays would be increased. So overall, for e-commerce as well, I mean, a new framework is being proposed. So overall, the budget where it is going, as you rightly said, it's not about numbers. It's about the direction it is taking, specifically when it comes to a particular sector or a particular focus area that the government has. And it has really shown over the last 4 or 5 years that it has built the base, and now it wants to exploit the capacity that has been created for the benefit of not only India, but to establish that leadership position that it wants to achieve in the coming, And one last bit is that there are milestones, of course, which are visible. And the milestones government has set is like, of course, there's 2024. Everybody is well aware. And then you all would have heard that in the next 7 to 10 years, India would be the top 3 economy. So that is one of the big milestones that they are aiming for. And by 2047, of course, the Amrit Kaal target, everybody knows how they have listed all those 100 goals that they have. So maybe I'll stop just in the question and answers, like to elaborate.
Thanks. So you rightly mentioned that one important thing that every company is about the simplicity regarding filing and organization. Where data governance and the infrastructure, especially in electronic sector development, has been a priority, which has been highlighted in several meetings. Parliament and as a community here, there is a chance that you have to get more jobs than things that come. indirectly because there is a lot of ancillary companies which we have made. So from the electronics industry, we might think that there will be a in India actually. Recently, I was just calculating India's deficit because of some of the important sectors, and of course, oil is an important thing, but electronic sector actually plays a very important. So if you convert the electronic sector from an importing sector in the next 25 years in an exporting sector, then possibly India and economic can be managed quite differently. And as we are predicting that there should be strategic focus and electronic sector may come that way. So we have given a clue that now the share of the investment which is related to the software side, more on the capital side, because manufacturing is being focused and PLI is coming up in a big way, and so that will good. And let us come back to the discussion on from the growth and overall economy. So one major issue is for the budget, or not for this government only, but in all the previous governments, bring that together, especially revenue and spending. Okay, so one issue is always there is bothering us that our expenditure is going up significantly, but our revenues are not. The revenue expenditure gap which is getting reflected in the deficit. At the same time, India's savings rate is going down. So we need to depend on external money for investment, or maybe more borrowing in the future. So how do you see that big investment target? Here, how do you see that? What would be the
I will be repeating that.
Thanks for the opportunity. Average health expenditure by the different country governments, and I have taken major countries, all major countries. So this is government health expenditure. Various countries, it is the average of our. So we can see, at the end, I mean, we have these OECD members, etc. They are spending more than 7% of their GDP on health and so on. So at the end, there is this white column. I mean, last but one column, that is India. Here in India, including state governments and central government, the total government expenditure on health as proportion of GDP, apart from the spending on water supply and sanitation, is less than 1%, okay? Which is a matter of shame. I mean, our out-of-pocket expenditure on health in this country is one of the highest in the whole world. As far as spending on education is concerned, again, the same story. You can see there are many country groups which are spending more than 4.5 to 5% of their GDP on education. Here in this country, we are spending, including state governments and central government. Of course, health education, primarily they are state subjects. Central government spends some money, but 80 to 85% of the total expenditure is borne by the state governments.
That's why state finances should be strengthened. I completely agree with Professor Chatterjee. Otherwise, human development would be compromised in this country, and social sector gaps are huge in this country. So, education expenditure is the last column. You can see. I mean, we are spending here in this part of the world. We spend the least on education as far as government expenditure on education is concerned. So, there are a lot of okay. This is the graph I have drawn. That is, if you take combined expenditure on health and education of state governments and central government taken together, that does not cross 5% of GDP. If you see, look at the data from 1991 to 2019-20 of 30 years, they are almost flat. There's absolutely no change. There are a little bit of fluctuations, but they are flat, and they are together, they are kind of less than 5% of GDP. If you look at the capital expenditure of government in this country, the aggregate capital expenditure, combined capital expenditure is also less than 5% or around 5% of GDP. As compared to that, the interest payment component, which I want to emphasize on, interest payment component on the past government debt is huge. It is higher than combined health and education expenditure of the state and central government in this country. Okay, it is higher than the combined capital expenditure of government in this country. This interest payment is taking away a lot of fiscal space. All right. Now, if we look at the interest payment component around the world, I mean, as far as developed countries, all developed countries taken together, all emerging market economies taken together, and low income economies taken together, these lower three panels are basically developed, middle income, and underdeveloped economy. And this thick black line on the top is the interest payment component as proportion of total government expenditure, aggregate government expenditure in India, in this country. So clearly, the rest of the world is not doing the mistake which we are continuously doing for the last almost 15 years or so. Now, why is it high here and why is it lower there? As far as public debt to GDP ratio is concerned, some people say that our accumulated public debt is very high in this country. That's why interest payment is higher. In fact, the finance question comes here that as far as development is concerned, you can see their debt to GDP ratio is more than 120%. In India, I mean, of late, because of COVID, etc., it has gone up a little bit. About 80% or so, otherwise it remains something around 60%, 60 to 70% in this country. Okay, so that is not very high. Okay, it is higher as compared to other poorer economies probably, but it is not that high also, which would become unsustainable. Now, as far as data on this is taken from IMF Fiscal Monitor. And I have taken again 43 average of 43 advanced countries, 95 emerging market economies, and 58 low-income economies. These are the averages. This is the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio of different country groups. So during the COVID years, you can see at the end, during the COVID years 2020-21. Fiscal deficit to GDP ratio increased everywhere. They're going down in negative quadrant. Okay, so fiscal deficit to GDP ratio has gone up everywhere. This red line is for advanced economies. So it has increased in advanced economies more than the emerging economies and the low-income economies, but it has increased all over the globe. Now, what is important to notice here is expenditure to GDP ratio. For the advanced economies, fiscal deficit to GDP ratio went up during COVID time because of expenditure enhancement. Okay, there was substantial expenditure enhancements. Already they were spending much higher than our kind of economy. For example, in India, the combined government expenditure to GDP ratio is around 26%. Okay, 26% of GDP. As compared to that, this red line tells you in advanced economies, the government expenditure to GDP ratio is more than 40%. All right. And in emerging market economies also, it is more than 30%. But here it is around 25, 26%. And that went up to around 50%, 47 to 48% during COVID years. As compared to that, the revenues to GDP as a proportion of GDP did not go down. In fact, for advanced economies, even during COVID time, revenue to GDP ratio actually went up a little bit. But here, our fiscal deficit to GDP ratio went up 12% of GDP, including state government fiscal deficit, primarily because of revenue shortfall, not because of expenditure enhancement. So that is one major thing which has to, this fiscal boost, this whatever you call it, Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan package, and under crisis to give the economy a boost. So, our government did not spend more as compared to, as proportion of GDP, unlike the advanced economies. They enhanced government expenditures. Our tax revenue fell down. That's why fiscal deficit went down. Now, you all are aware of how much time do I have? May I take 10 minutes? Okay. So I hope you all are students of economics, so you must be aware of this identity, y equals c plus I plus g plus x minus m is fundamental. So here, what is happening, as Chatterjee was saying, that this is a cause of concern, that our private investment is not picking up. In fact, not only because of COVID, during COVID, the purchasing power of people went down and there was demand constraint situation, etc., etc. Even before COVID, for last 7-8 years, our non-food credit offtake from all commercial banks as proportion of GDP is continuously coming down. This is the major cause of concern. That's why jobs are not getting created at macroeconomic at aggregate level. Government jobs are just 2% of total jobs in this country. Okay, 98% jobs are created by the private sector, formal and informal sector. So private investment is not picking up. Why is it not picking up? Because there is not enough demand in the market. And why there is not enough demand in the market? People don't have purchasing power and so on. You must have read about accelerator model. So investment, this I component, is also dependent on aggregate demand. That in turn is dependent on the GDP. Therefore, it is not something exogenous, it is rather endogenous component. Consumption expenditure is of course exogenous, it is dependent on aggregate income. Okay. When aggregate income is not growing at a fast enough rate to create enough jobs, then there are only two options to boost extra demand to inject extra demand into the system, demand constraint system. One is by expanding government expenditure, second by export-led growth. Okay. But under this global recessionary situation, there is not much hope of export-led growth. Our export growth rate has actually been recorded in last couple of years. So from X minus M, you would not have much hope. And therefore, if C and I become endogenous, if X minus M does not grow to boost the economy, then G is the only option to boost the economy. So expansionary fiscal policy, which is called Keynesian demand management policy, should be undertaken under a demand constraint situation like this to create job, to generate income into the hand of people, to boost demand for industries, to boost growth and make investment profitable and so on. So if that is the context, in that context, the desirable policy direction should be, I have listed like this, that increasing the total government expenditure, of course, as proportion of GDP, increasing the social sector expenditures, health, education, and so on, NREGA, job creation for rural development, increasing the capital expenditure, which has been done to some extent at least, increasing the transfer of resources to the state governments. More resources have to be transferred to the state government because state finances have become more tight. They don't hardly have any financial autonomy after implementation of GST, as Professor Chatterjee was mentioning. So they have to be empowered by more transfer of finances from the center. Then reducing the interest payment component, as I was pointing out, that interest payment component is very high. How to reduce it? By restructuring the public debt. In fact, most of our public debt, most of our government papers are held by the commercial banks and the insurance company and the private corporate sector. So our effective rate of interest on our government debt is around 7 to 8%. Okay, as compared to that, our Reserve Bank of India right now, they are sitting on a huge foreign exchange reserve of $575 billion. they do make investment of this money, and their average rate of interest earning per year on this investment is below 2%. Okay, and the government is borrowing money to finance its fiscal deficit at 7 to 8%. Does it make any sense? Why can't government borrow from RBI, from the central bank? Because central bank is giving loan at 2% interest rate to others, and government is borrowing at 7 to 8% interest rate from the commercial banks and the insurance companies in this country. So, I mean, by restructuring the government debt, I mean, earlier, this has happened because in 1997, there was a treaty signed between the Ministry of Finance and the Reserve Bank of India, by which we stopped monetization in this country. And because of that thing, we cannot borrow directly from the RBI. But I think that constraint should be removed now. It's high time, and government should be allowed to borrow from the Reserve Bank rather than going for market borrowing. And monetization does not necessarily cause inflation. Because already while accumulating this $575 billion of foreign exchange reserve, government in exchange, RBI had to pay domestic currency, domestic rupee. Monetization took place there also, and reserve money went up continuously, but inflation is not linked with that at all. So if foreign currency reserve gets accumulated, it would not be inflationary. But if fiscal deficit is financed through monetization, it would be inflationary. That is, logically incorrect theory in my view. So, okay, then, increasing the revenue GDP ratio, which is absolutely essential, because if we want the government to spend more money on health, education, infrastructure, and so on and so forth, government also need more resources, more revenues. In this country, the tax GDP ratio is around 20%, which is one of the lowest in the whole world. So tax GDP ratio has to be improved. However, our tax rates are not low. Our tax compliance is extremely low. Most of the people are not paying tax. So it is those who are actually paying tax. So our tax rates are not very low. But our compliance can be improved through increasing the efficiency of tax collecting authority, through increasing the tax information network of the government, through reducing the degree of corruption in this country. And if there's a will, government will, then definitely there will be to some extent at least, we will be able to achieve these goals. So improving the tax compliance and introducing wealth tax and property inheritance tax. This is very, very important. Because in this country, it is unthinkable in developed world that there is absolutely zero wealth tax and property inheritance tax. Of course, after giving huge exemption, let's say up to 1 crore rupees you don't tax. After that, those who are super rich in this country, if you put some property inheritance tax, okay, through their efficiency, probably they have earned a lot of money. But their sons and daughters are getting that, inheriting that property free of cost, absolutely free of cost. They would not mind probably paying some 5% rate of tax. Those who are super rich, I'm talking about them, that can mobilize enough money for spending substantially more on health, education, employment generation. And finally, I would like to argue that Keynesian policy rather than neoclassical monetarism, that higher fiscal deficit would necessarily cause crowding out of private investment and so on, which we read, that is neoclassical theory, that is compatible only with either full employment or full capacity level of output. That is not necessarily true in the context of an economy like India, which is operating under demand constraint situation. Now, given this context, if we look at our Indian budget of this year, everything has been calculated as proportion of GDP. I have compared revised estimate of last year, this continuing year, 2022-23, with this estimate of 2023-24. The total expenditure, okay, changes are given in the bold. So total expenditure as proportion of GDP in this budget has been reduced by minus 0.4%. That means percentage point. 0.1% is something around 30,000 crore rupees. Okay, so 0.4,000 is 1,20,000 crore rupees, roughly. Revenue expenditure has been reduced drastically. Capital expenditure has been enhanced, but total expenditure has been reduced by reducing revenue expenditure more than proportionately. then these investment remain the same more or less. But net capital expenditure, since capital expenditure is for asset accumulation, the disinvestment should be treated as a negative capital expenditure because it accumulates the existing assets. So if we net out this disinvestment proceeds from the capital expenditure, the net capital expenditure is around 3.1%, not 3.3% of GDP. Total expenditure similarly would be 14.7%, not 14.9% of GDP. As far as education, health, there is hardly any increase. You can see rural development, there is a reduction because MGNREGS expenditure has been budgeted to be lower by around 30,000 crore rupees. Then agriculture, there's a lower budget this time. Subsidies, food, fertilizer, and petroleum subsidies. By petroleum subsidy, I mean particularly cooking gas, which was one of the flagship programs of this government. The subsidy has been drastically cut on cooking gas by 75%. Then this finance commission grants to states. Finance commission transfers have two components. One is grant, second is tax devolution. Tax devolution is formula based, that is states' right. And as far as finance commission grants are concerned, that has been reduced substantially by around 30,000 crore rupees. Tax revenue has increased slightly, but not substantially. Despite that, what have been reduced are the deficits. You see, revenue deficit to GDP ratio, fiscal deficit to GDP ratio, and primary deficit. What is primary deficit? That is fiscal deficit minus the interest payment component. So they have been reduced substantially, and the interest payment component has gone up by around 0.13%. So this is in brief. This is the budget of this year. The macro numbers, the broad picture of this budget. So I would like to argue that given the context that we have said, this budget is more influenced by neoclassical school of thought rather than Keynesian expansionary fiscal policy under demand depression. So I would like to argue that probably the policy direction in which we should go is, government is time and again saying that we should not miss the bus, we should not miss the bus, demographic dividend, and so on. But probably the direction in which the budget and finance in this country is proceeding, we are missing the bus, and we have already missed the bus, in my opinion. So I hope that probably there will be a change in the policy direction sooner than the later. I have written a piece for one of the Bengali newspapers, Anandabad Patrika, the English version of that. If you are interested, you can have a look at this recall.in. There I have a piece that's in English for your consideration. And thank you very much for paying attention. Thank you. And this is my mail ID if you want to contact me. Thanks.
Thanks. So, you understand that moving money is starting today, and I'm aware how so we have that here. So, before we go to I have two questions. We can spend 5 to 10 minutes on it, and then we can take up. One question is about the employment generation. One way the government is talking about that high capping actually going to generate a lot of employment. And on the other hand, you see the rural investment are almost very importantly and their investment is going down. So rural employment generation will go down. So there could be possibly again a migration because of the less investment in rural India. But at the same time, when there is a high capex investment, then the job creation possibly will be on the skilled workers. So why is the unskilled workers? This is one question. And the second question is that
whether so much of capital investments will really generate private investment. You mentioned about trafficking. These are the two questions you can just debate among ourselves for next 5-10 minutes, and then we can do that.
We just talk about the first part of the question where you said where would the unskilled people go? The way the economy is shaped, agriculture employs a number of people, and in fact, when I was thinking about it and about the other trends in the budget, is one trend, and this will also answer the question that you have raised, that how can we ensure that agriculture is more productive, competitive, and it can employ more people. And the second part, what also mentioned about the over-urbanization, the migration, the issue of migration. I think that I realized and I noted down as trend from the budget, which will help answer this question, was we almost remember that the farm laws that government had passed had to be rolled back, and the big emphasis or the objective with which government has said that this is our mandate and that the reason that we pass farm laws is to attract private capital in the agriculture and allied services. And it is also very much known that out of the various things which are ailing agriculture and allied sectors, one is because of the lack of storage facilities, district level storage facilities, that is a problem in horticulture, fisheries, even agriculture, etc. And government had hoped that through farm laws, it would be able to get that much of capital to create a supply chain across the country. So what I wanted to highlight in this budget is this silent cooperative revolution which is taking place, and I kind of read it up also because after the farm laws were passed and then the cooperative ministry was created, and there was a lot of curiosity that why the home minister is taking cooperative ministry and what are they going to do. I've read and seen over the last few years that a number of cooperatives at district level are being created in the hope that the same cooperative now, and which is thrust again in this budget also, would be creating those storage facilities across the district. And I think that should help the agricultural elite sector. The second point is, you mentioned about migration. There has been an ongoing discussion in the agriculture ministry about, and this is also related to climate change. I'm sure you know about this concept of food mile, that the food that we eat travels, how much does it travel? The milk that we're drinking, there's a question that don't we have enough milk in 100 kilometers around Delhi, that the milk that we drink comes from 300, 330, 150 kilometers away. And it is happening in all of the major the urban cities. And that is why that's a huge problem. That is not only adding to the climate change problem, but it is also a reason why a lot of migration is happening. Why can't we source what is consumed in these cities from the nearby villages or nearby towns? And that is with this thought in mind that this agripreneur fund has been brought in. I was part in some discussion when this was firming up. So, and I'm happy that this budget is being allocated this year to the agripreneur fund, which will essentially work towards creating such centers around these populated cities, so that a lot of these burdens on these cities can be taken off, and in a way we would also be able to reduce our food miles and hence the control the climate change part of it, and that should also take care of the environment problems.
And I think this question about unskilled employment depends critically on what will they do with the capex, right? I mean, capex expenditure. If it is going to be primarily on roads and railways, is actually going to employ unskilled workers. But it's very temporary in nature. Once the road is built, that's it, it's done. It's not going to generate, it's not going to create a space where stable job is going to be created, right? And that's the big challenge, right? And whereas something like we talked about, for example, going back to that, let's say a school is not, then allied activities, including teachers, including all kinds of things, it generates a long-term employment. So it depends on where this money is going to be spent. Looking at the numbers, I think it's disproportionately high on roads and railways at this point, where I think it is again going to attract a lot more unskilled workers. And then remember now, actually in India,
Production linked.
production linked incentives. Yeah, too many acronyms, right? I was particularly pleased to hear BISTI, but it was something else in the budget. But anyway, going back to that. So again, let's think about the global context a little bit, because what has happened is industrial policy has been that's come back in a big way, right? And that's a big problem actually, because we have gone through that cycle, because industrial policy can lead to misallocation, right? And chronism and so many other problems that's associated with it. But now we see that happening globally, and in many cases, particularly linked with semiconductors, it's actually strategic, right? So India is also doing that. India is investing about 26 billion in semiconductors, I think 26 billion, which is minuscule compared to the global expenditure in semiconductors, over 300 billion. So I don't know how much dividend it will generate in that also. Also, what we don't, by the way, in semiconductors and in terms of thinking about industrial policy, a huge story of failure is China. China over the last 10 years has spent tremendous amount of money in trying to get the semiconductors into their country, right? It's enormous, really enormous amount of money. They did all kinds of things that they're going to do, and suddenly in very recent times they have completely given up on that, right? So one of the big changes across the globe and industry policy that has happened, China has given up hope that it will be the leader in semiconductor production and semiconductor technology, and that's actually significant, right? So it hasn't worked. We in India have seen a lot of other industrial policy that has worked. Now we're getting back to we talked about industrial policy about in some sense shrimps, and three Bengalis here. We are all very happy about it, but really we need industrial policy. There's an industrial policy on lab-produced gems or diamonds, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing. I mean, government's attention is limited. So if it is going to be, is it going to think about all of this? Is it really going to be able to calculate the returns on all of that and so on and so forth, and do the allocation exceptionally well? Doubting, right? That's something that I wonder whether it will actually, the capital, the expenditure, though this budget suddenly is silent about PLI, but a lot of investment has gone into that. What will that amount to? And clearly, so far we are not seeing those kind of returns. We are not seeing those kind of returns in terms of either investment or the amount of employment it should have generated by now, right? So that's something that we have to be again careful that we don't get into that trap of thinking into minutest of the things and miss the big picture in terms of what the path should be going forward.
So the two questions, I think one was, of course, where does the unskilled person go? And again, I'll like to bring in how things have changed over the past 3-4 years, and what has happened there for the unskilled person. So when you think about unskilled person, typically, as you mentioned, the agri sector comes into your mind. Then also come into picture those people, the hawkers who are on the roadside, selling something. The people who are doing that manual labor, as rightly pointed out, being covered by Vega or any construction activity. So for each of these, of course, there are separate kind of opportunities which are available. Maybe just as an example, let's begin with the roadside hawkers and what has happened in terms of the enabling platform, if it is available to them, what it would do for them, right? So if you go back 4 years before monetization, the unorganized sector, the way it was operating, of course, purely based on cash, nothing being tracked, no financial profile being generated for them. And then suddenly demonetization happened, and good or bad, that's a different topic of debate. But what it did, it forced everybody to look at technology and then sustain themselves out of using and enabling, being enabled by that technology. And what it did with the payment systems now being available in the last mile, and this sheet does mention the last mile as one of the key features, right? And rightly so, because if you start focusing in a different way of to tackle a problem that is in front of you, then of course innovative ways come up. Now, what has digital payments done to these roadside hawkers? It has started generating a profile for them, where earlier the formal credit was not available to them. Is right now being made available to them because they have a profile to show. Similarly, when it comes to say agriculture, the way agriculture was being done versus the way it is being planned right now to aid by creating a stack for agriculture, where from the very beginning input to the marketing level input is available to the farmer, not only just in the form of an information, but also in form of any other assistance that is being available with technology. That is one. So this problem can be handled innovatively. And of course, it will not address everything. Of course, CapEx has been discussed very extensively how to generate those employment, if at all, some temporary, some permanent. And then it comes, then the second question about how is private sector looking, whether they are infused and whether they would invest or not. I would say yes. PLIs, as you rightly pointed out, might not have been able to show the effect that they were originally planned with. But also to bring to focus is that PLI is not very one sector specific. PLIs have been replicated across sectors, and these are long-term, long gestation kinds of projects. Of course, it takes time to really reflect upon. And you were mentioning that from the import economy to export economy, that's the whole target of the PLI basically. That you not only manufacture for the country, but you also start exporting. And then the third question about strategic importance. So all of it actually creates an opportunity for the private sector. And you have seen by the number of increase in the manufacturing unit that existed, say in 2016 or 15, about 1-2, to today being more than 400 manufacturing units. So of course, investment has come in and it has generated employment. Now, moving from the hardware sector to the software side, companies like us, Microsoft, big corporates, they have invested again heavily. They've invested heavily in India in terms of data centers that we have created, because we know what is going to happen with the data economy and the kind of focus that the government has shown by really allocating funds to that particular sector, data governance, as I mentioned, the centers that they are creating. All of it actually presents an opportunity for us to go in, work together with the government, and thankfully they have also opened up the R&D for the private sector to be a part of it. Defense is an example already. You saw the kind of things happening on both sides. Now coming to the semiconductor problem specifically on the software side, if you really start looking what is happening in the R&D and what happened with China, maybe there is a difference in the entire story, because a lot of R&D related to semiconductor was already happening out of India. So that ecosystem is readily available to us. We can plug into that, leverage, create that capacity in hard form that we're ready to do. Of course, again, that's not very certain because it's a long period that it takes for the semiconductor industry to really show up in terms of the returns that it generates. So overall, I would say yes, there are certain points that needs to be really looked at from a different point. But both for the non-skilled people, where do they go? There are opportunities, as I mentioned, and for the private sector, a lot of opportunities have been created and investments are happening. We ourselves are, very positive on India's story and are investing heavily.
Thanks. If we
assume that our population is 137 crore in the country. Then according to PLSS data, our size of the labor force in this country is around 51 crore. More than 50% of that labor force is self-employed. They are all these retail business persons, these small auto taxi drivers, and all this.
Just to interject, 50% is actually out of labor force.
Out
Of
of
that.
labor force.
I mean,
Yeah.
of the power.
Now, many of them are studying.
Yeah. So even if you take 25 to 65.
Right. So, I mean, we are operating, third largest economy, etc., because of the scale factor, because it's a big country, it's a highly populated country. European countries are comparable with our states. UP is larger than Italy and France in terms of population. So, I mean, our country is big country, highly populated country. So when we are talking about employment generation of such huge labor force, it's a huge challenge. So we have to, active, efforts are absolutely required. We have to probably create a congenial environment in this country where businesses can take place, where employment can be generated, and so on and so forth. Otherwise, small fellows, petty producers also can make some money to run their families and so on. In order to do that, it is linked with the business question also. It's not about skill until I don't understand the skill question. Frankly speaking, the day before yesterday, I was reading a news. Even my own cousin brothers who are IIT pass out, they are so-called skilled laborers, but they are all into IT sector, and that has nothing to do with engineering, which they studied in IIT. So, if skill is required of certain kind, that skill formation would take place. Keynes called it frictional unemployment. Temporarily, for some time period, there could be, some scarcity of skilled personnel probably. But if there is a demand for particular kind of skill, that kind of skill would be formed. That kind of institutions would come up, and they would train people and so on. The problem is, and unskilled. I don't think that others are unskilled. They don't have university degrees, or they have different kind of skills. Without those skills, it is not possible to become a plumber or an electrician or even cook in Davos. So I think ultimately it's a question of profitability of small businesses. Without that, in this country, you can't absorb a labor force which is of that size. So there, I have a feeling that the small and medium scale enterprises in this country is suffering like hell. And the startups, etc., for advertisement they are talking about. But my friends try to start some businesses. It is next to impossible to start a business in this country. They don't get loans from the bank. There is zero financial deepening in this country. However low credit rating might be, some 10 favored fellows are there. They would get thousands of crores of rupees loan from the government commercial banks, and the rest of the investors would not get anything. Even if they get, they would get at a terms which is completely unfavorable and actually loss making. So under that kind of a situation, I think it is impossible to do business, number one. And on the demand side, this is from the supply side. On the demand side, obviously because of lack of purchasing power, because of saturation of market, only 20% of our population politely call ourselves to be middle class. Actually, less than 3% population pay direct tax in this country. So including their family members, this tax concession has been given in media. It was highlighted like anything from 5 lakh to 7 lakh, which is the exemption limit of income tax. Maximum 10% of the families in this country would be benefited out of that policy. 90% people fall below that category. So 90% of the family. So that is the situation. Now, until and unless you can enhance the purchasing power of these 80 to 90% people in this country, however, big scale, big market, big numbers we talk about, it would not solve this gigantic problem.
Okay, so we have very less time, but we can still take some questions from students. So yeah, go ahead. Crypto.
I think in crypto, the stance of the government is very clear. RBI from time to time has kept warning. Very recently, the governor again warned when there was a decline. He said, remember what I had said 2 years, 3 years back, some kind of quote has come. So I think they're not very receptive to the idea. Also, the advent of CBDC, you've already seen that it will be making its debut. Government is saying if you're so concerned about the, pace of the transaction, the ease of the transaction, we are giving you an option. So in my honest opinion, government is not very supportive. It has in fact never been. All these things, high tax, etc., are again indications that, if you stay away, if at all, if you want to invest, there are other things of it. So that's the short story basically. There's a lot of points of view.
Sir, I have two questions.
Yeah, okay.
There are two questions. First is regarding GST. Do you think we should go back to the GST era? If this is the GST is being seen as a cause of conflict state, which has a majority stake in upliftment of the population, and the central government, which is now seen in controlling a major part of the GST and probably creating a problem. Though we will not know, but that's what the newspapers say. That the states are complaining that they are not getting their share of the GST. State government is for this claim, and the central government has said that the claims are not audited by their people, not being signed by the people who are authorized to sign and sending the claim. So these are conflicts. So is it the right time to re-examine the whole GST profile, or is it that we need to give more time for the GST to mature and stabilize and reap the benefits of the GST? That's one question. Second, after this.
Sure. Look, the idea of GST is good, right? There's no question about that, okay, it reduces friction in the economy, particularly interstate transfer of goods and services and things like that. So, though there are other examples in other countries, including US and Canada, for example, Canada, Quebec is separate, the rest have a harmonized tax rate. So it is, and even European Union, right, there is a possibility where you can actually work with the different tax rates, yet restrictions, but given the complexities that exist in India anyway, I think the idea that there's a single tax rate in the country is a good idea. But then the issues about how to design that. Right? That's where I think the main crux of the thing is. And in terms of design, there is two big aspects. One is the whole slabs of interest rates, etc. That's where a large part of the confusion comes, and I'm kind of going back to the micromanaging interest rate policy, trying to micromanage this tax bracket, sometimes even 2.5% for this or that, right? That's always a challenge, and that actually, even from a theoretical point of view, actually increases more friction, right? So that's one thing that we need to look at in terms of designing the GST. That can that be simplified? Can that be reduce the number of slabs, maybe even at 2 or 3? That's one thing. But then the substantial question that you asked is essentially about this state versus center relationship and so on. Now, the thing is, how GST is implemented is also so in different states. 50% of the companies are audited by the state, whereas 50% are audited by the center, and these are randomly assigned, right? This is a very complex thing to begin with. So where we had hoped that the cost of collection will also reduce, that hasn't actually that much. I don't know the data, frankly, because we don't get much data, so I can't calculate it. But the sense is that it has not happened, right? So that's one. And second is, and I think it goes back to what you were saying, that we need an environment of trust. We need an environment where, the conflicts are minimized. And that's something that's critical because the GST Council is not central. The GST Council is not the state. It's a combination of all of it, right? And where it could be a place where dialogues would happen earlier. The Planning Commission, which is now the NITI Aayog, used to be the place where all of these kind of dialogue and negotiations between center and state happen. Now actually that space is gone and only the GST Council remains. And somewhat, whatever I'm reading from newspaper at least, and I don't know the real story there, looks like not much dialogue, not much conversation is happening there. So more than, in the center-state relationship, more than anything else, right now, I think the conflict management is a big part of it. The other aspect that is not addressed by GST is different states can have different kinds of risks and how to manage that risk, right? And that's something that we can think about and maybe find a solution that, okay, the risks can be about natural disasters and with climate change and things like that that's happening. We will see more and more of those happening probably, but also of other kinds that can come through for a variety of reasons. So we need to figure out when a government, a particular state is in need for more resources, how do they actually generate that risk, right? And that's something that's not there in the GST right now. So that's something probably that can be worked.
Second question was from Daster. This is regarding, though you didn't answer, I actually just context. Interest rate on the highest on payment. You did mention, but I missed it. Why should the government borrow it from the pushing back and other institutions when RBI is ready to give you? You did answer, especially now the common man can go to the RBI retail from the facility that is recently started. Where earlier you had to go to some agent or to the bank, invest it for 90 days, 91 days, or 100 days. RBI has recently started something called RBI retail, where if I have a small amount of money or if I have a short duration of time where I really don't know where to put money, RBI gives me a 7.25%, 7.25% rate of interest, and the duration is fixed. 91 days, double it, 182 days, double it, 364 days. Beyond that, it's a separate, and that RBI platform offers me for different type of business. I can, state governments are borrowing from the local customers directly. That's, I can give a loan to the Delhi government, the state government bond which they develop on that. I can borrow the some gold bonds, invest into it, and RBI is directly without any intermediate charges, which normally banks take. What is this? We can use as a retailer, why not government? Where are our advisors to the government? Why are they not giving? Nothing. So that truly academic concern that our advisors are there. Is there any, roadblock going against the or are they rather giving the debt?
Thank you, sir. Thanks for the question. I think it's very interesting question. I was the research assistant to Dr. C. Rangarajan and in 12th Finance Commission. And on behalf of RBI, when he was the governor of RBI, he signed this treaty in 1997 with the Ministry of Finance. And that time, the understanding was there was this process of automatic monetization. That whatever would be fiscal deficit, that would be monetized. That was the system earlier. So to stop that process of automatic monetization, they brought this MOU in operation and said that this automatic process of automatic monetization would be stopped. And there was another concern, that is government being a privileged borrower can borrow money at a discounted lower interest rate than the ongoing market interest rate. So this is really not fair to the private players who are borrowing for their investment purpose, borrowing at 12%, 13% interest rate, and government is getting loan from the central bank at 2%, 3%. But all over the globe, the government borrow from their own central bank. It is not a new practice, or it is not.
So that was the concern at that time. However, they could not probably imagine of this situation, which has become the case in last 10, 15 years. And now I made a presentation in Ministry of Finance when Krishnamurthy Subramanian was the economic advisor. So, and I told that, that this can be done easily, and RBI was happy to. In fact, we contacted RBI people; they were happy to lend us the government. And some modalities, some MOUs have to be signed probably, all these and some technical things. However, the main opposition, in my opinion, came from the bondholders, present bondholders, who are getting it's absolutely risk-free. So the commercial banks and the insurance companies, they are getting a kind of guarantee from the government that they would get at least 7 to 8% assured. So that way, I think in our country, the interest rate, which is, be it the whole spectrum of interest rate, be it deposit rate, lending rate, or whatever you think of, one administered rate is bank rate or repo rate. The other administered rate is this government bond, rate on government bond. They say that it is market determined. It is not at all market determined. The borrowing office of RBI, we went to RBI and followed their procedure. It's all got up. These primary dealers, PDs, they have an understanding with the government. If the rate of interest is fixed at 8%, they will sell the bond at 92 rupees, 100 rupees bond at 92 rupees, ensuring 8% interest. So it's already set. Therefore, obviously those who are holding this 80% of GDP amount of government bonds, 10% is still held by RBI, but 90% of that, they will be deprived. So it would go against their interest. They will not allow you to do that very easily. I think that's the political challenge. And may I add one point to GST? In earlier question, if time is there.
Go ahead.
Quickly, this GST is very interesting. I also wrote one article in EPW, I think in 2016, when it was getting implemented. When Mr. Narendra Modi was Chief Minister of Gujarat, he was opposing. After becoming Prime Minister, he implemented, and all these controversies happened. In fact, I remember that time I was working in NIPFP. Professor Kavita Rao floated one rate, Pinaki Chakraborty floated one rate. Ministry of Finance, Kelkar Sahab was in Finance Commission. He said that 12%, and so on. Ultimately, it became 18%. The fact of the matter is, after 2008 financial crisis of the US, as many as 143 countries around the globe have implemented GST in some form or other. So it has come from above. It's not that, in our media, only domestic things are covered. Secondly, if you look at the GST rates all over the world, it varies between 16 and 20%. Our rate is 18%. So all these, revenue neutral rates, etc., these debates, discussion, seminars are all eyewash. Where from is it coming? How to influence that? All those are real questions, which we don't consider very much. That is one. Second is, vis-a-vis implementation, there are a lot of confusion. In fact, I have a friend who is IRS officer. I was asking him on ad hoc, completely on ad hoc basis. They were telling me in Hyderabad that up to 1 crore rupees, we give it to the state government official. And if it is greater than 1 crore, then we directly intervene. Now, there is this ego problem because you are supposed to tax on the same base. The state government officer thinks that it is our tax. Sales tax was under our jurisdiction. The central government officers think that we are superior officers than the state government officers. So they are under us. So these are practical problems. So the implementation of GST has been, more importantly, I think when this one country, one tax, that slogan was there, the understanding was there will be one indirect tax. Therefore, even if you increase the rate from 12.5% of VAT or 14% of service tax rate to 18%, then also the tax burden or tax incidence would not go higher, because all other taxes will be abolished. That has not happened. Only excise duty has been abolished. All other taxes are existing at their existing rates. So as a result of that, effective tax rate has gone up in the economy. Naturally, that would have implications for this.
Any other question? Okay, so thank you, everyone. Okay, yes. Anyone?
Sorry, I couldn't get the full question, but your question, as I understand, is if this exemptions have been increased, will that change consumption? Will that increase consumption? Look, as he was talking about, it actually impacts very small number of people. That's number one, right? I mean, so I'm not sure how much consumption will actually change. Right? That's the thing. Second, I think more than that, even for those people who are probably paying income tax and can, it's a lot of confusion. So what actually matters is the lack, in a consumer's mind that whether, oh, I'm going to save 2,000 rupees. Maybe I'll go and spend 1,500 in the market, say 500 or whatever. As of now, there's no clarity on that either. So even if something happens, it might happen in the future years when there's much more clarity, people do understand and settle down into one or the other. Right now, in fact, I don't see any impact of this thing on consumption.
Can I add? Yeah. Yeah, let's just go ahead. Yeah. Just that.
Yes, inflation, when consumption demand rises, please. When consumption, it does not necessarily cause inflation.
Right.
I mean, it is the demand constraint situation when consumption demand or domestic demand is not growing at a fast enough pace. That is the problem. So if it grows under a demand constraint situation, there would be higher output. There will be supply side adjustment to the larger demand. Not necessarily it will increase price. Secondly, there is no possibility of demand pull inflation. Some inflation can happen, which can be supply push. That is because of international increase in international oil price, or because of structural, as you were saying that if they reduce subsidies on cooking gas and other things, it could be inflationary. But those are called supply push inflation or structural inflation. But what you are talking about is demand pull inflation. So it is very important to understand the differences between demand pull, supply push, and structural pull. Inflation, we all are about.
We are having different type of tax structures which are food tax and gold tax. Is it not fair to remove the confusion of tax? Any confusion? Pay so much and then that's it. Is that the thought process?
That's exactly what.
Yeah, I think Minister has mentioned that any changes or any kind of benefits will be given only in the new tax. So the idea is the old tax rate is very poor. Okay, so thank you everyone.
It was quite an insightful discussion.
Thank you.
I over had lots to take away from it. I'm sure most of people in the audience would have found the discussion to be quite enlightening. Now, before we proceed any further, I would like to request our esteemed panelists to kindly accept mementos as a token of gratitude.
Having
As we near the end of this illuminating panel discussion, we retire much more conscious and aware of what this union budget truly encompasses. On behalf of all the students at Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, I feel privileged to present this vote of thanks. First of all, we would like to extend our most sincere appreciation and gratitude to all the panelists who graced this occasion with their invaluable presence. I thank Professor Parsa Chatterjee, Professor at Shivnadar University, Dr. Surjit Das, Professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Mr. Rajesh Ranjan, Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy at Microsoft, and Mr. Ravi Pokharna, Executive Director at Pehle India Foundation. We also thank Professor Biswajit Nag for moderating the panel and ensuring that the discussion proceeded quite smoothly. Also, we would like to express our gratitude to Professor Biswajit Nag, Dr. Anirban Biswas, and Dr. Sugandha Puria for being our guiding light in organizing this event successfully. Moreover, we would also like to express our appreciation toward all the attendees for taking the time out in this afternoon and join us today to ensure that this session be a resounding success. Finally, we would also like to take this opportunity to thank the organizing committee and all the technical staff for their endless behind the scenes efforts that were vital in ensuring the success of this event. With that, I would like to bid adieu to everyone. Thank you once again. This is Lakshya Ghattan signing off. And now I would request the esteemed panelists to kindly proceed to Sanjeevani for hierarchy and refreshment.